It was a quiet morning in the city when a little girl, no older than 7, walked nervously into a luxury cafe. Her clothes were simple, her shoes a little worn, and she clutched a small coin in her hand. She stepped up to the counter, her voice barely above a whisper. "Excuse me, sir, may I please have some milk?" The barista froze for a moment, glancing at the line of wealthy customers behind her. But before he could answer, a tall man in an expensive suit, a well-known millionaire who loved to flaunt his wealth, stepped forward. He let out a sharp laugh that echoed across the cafe. "Milk?" he sneered loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "You think this place gives out handouts? Maybe you should try a farm instead of bothering people like me." The girl lowered her head, embarrassed as murmurs spread through the crowd. Some people shook their heads at the harshness, others smirked, entertained by the man's arrogance. The child's eyes shimmered with tears, but she stayed still, holding on to her coin as if it meant everything in the world. No one expected what the millionaire would do next. The cafe grew uncomfortably silent after the millionaire's cruel words. The little girl's lips trembled, but she refused to cry. She placed the small coin gently on the counter and whispered again, "It's all I have, but I just wanted a little milk for my baby brother." Her words caught a few people off guard. A couple of customers shifted uneasily, but none dared to speak. The millionaire smirked, adjusting his gold watch as if the scene amused him. "Keep your coin," he scoffed. "It won't even buy a drop here. This is a place for people who can actually afford things. You don't belong here." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The girl's face flushed with humiliation, but she stood her ground. The barista hesitated, torn between his job and his conscience, when suddenly the millionaire raised his hand dramatically. "Fine," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "If it's milk you want, then milk you'll have." He reached into his wallet, pulled out a thick stack of bills, and tossed them onto the counter. Everyone's eyes widened. But instead of giving the girl what she asked for, he turned to the entire cafe and made a shocking announcement. "You all want to see a show? Watch what happens next." The crowd leaned in, not knowing whether to be outraged or intrigued. The millionaire's smirk grew wider as he waved the barista closer. "Bring her the largest glass of milk you've got," he ordered, his tone theatrical, like a performer about to put on a show. The barista, clearly uncomfortable, obeyed. Within moments, a tall glass of fresh milk was placed on the counter. The little girl's eyes lit up with hope, until the man leaned in and whispered loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Drink it here. Right now. Every drop. Let's see if you can even handle it." The cafe erupted in uneasy laughter. Some people found it cruel, others watched in stunned silence. The girl's tiny hands wrapped around the glass. She looked at it, then at the crowd, her cheeks burning red. But instead of lifting it to her lips, she gently shook her head. "It's not for me," she said softly. "It's for my brother. He's too small, and he's hungry. I only wanted to take it home to him." The words pierced through the room like a blade. The laughter died instantly. A mother sitting with her child covered her mouth in shock. Even the barista's eyes softened with guilt. For the first time, the millionaire's arrogant expression faltered. He hadn't expected her answer. The cafe's atmosphere had completely changed. Where moments earlier there was mockery, now there was silence heavy enough to cut with a knife. Every pair of eyes locked on the millionaire, waiting to see what he would do next. The little girl still stood there, small and fragile, her hands folded politely in front of her. She hadn't begged, she hadn't cried, she had only spoken the truth. That truth made the millionaire's showmanship suddenly feel cheap and heartless. A man at one of the tables muttered under his breath, "Unbelievable." Another woman whispered to her friend, "She just wanted to help her brother." The pressure mounted. The millionaire, feeling the heat of their judgment, straightened his tie and forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow now. "Oh, come on," he said, trying to wave off the tension. "It was just a joke." But no one laughed with him. The weight of silence pressed harder, and for the first time, the man who usually thrived on attention looked cornered. Then, in a move no one expected, he snapped his fingers at the barista. "Bring me more," he commanded. "Not one glass, every bottle of milk you've got in this place." The barista blinked in disbelief. "All of it, sir." "Yes. All of it." The millionaire's voice was sharp, but there was something different in his tone now, urgency. The crowd leaned in, unsure if this was another act of cruelty or the beginning of something else entirely. The barista hesitated but did as he was told. Bottle after bottle of fresh milk was carried from the back and stacked onto the counter until it looked almost absurd, an entire mountain of glass bottles shining under the cafe lights. The little girl's eyes widened. She clutched her coin tighter, unsure what was happening. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Some thought he was going to mock her again, others feared he might waste it all just to prove his point. But then, the millionaire did something no one saw coming. He pulled out his checkbook, scribbled a signature with a flourish, and slid it across the counter. "This should cover everything, not just today, but for as long as it takes," he declared loudly. The barista froze as he looked at the number. His jaw dropped. The check wasn't for a few hundred or even a few thousand. It was for enough money to keep the cafe stocked with milk for years. The millionaire then bent down to the girl's level, his arrogant smirk replaced by something softer, almost humbled. He gently pushed the mountain of bottles toward her. "Take all of it," he said quietly. "And make sure your brother never goes hungry again." The cafe gasped as the little girl's lip trembled, not with humiliation this time, but with gratitude. The entire room burst into applause, stunned by the millionaire's sudden change of heart. Word of the scene spread faster than anyone expected. A young woman at the cafe had recorded the entire exchange on her phone, from the millionaire's harsh humiliation to his jaw-dropping turnaround. Within hours, the video was online, shared across every platform imaginable. By evening, millions had already seen it. Headlines blared across news sites. Millionaire's cruel taunt turns into stunning act of kindness. Little girl's request for milk moves billionaire to tears. Comment sections exploded with debate. Some viewers accused the man of staging the act for publicity. Others argued that even if it started as arrogance, his final decision changed everything. But one thing was undeniable, the image of that small girl standing bravely in front of him, asking only for milk for her baby brother, had touched the world. Meanwhile, reporters crowded outside the millionaire's office the next morning. For once, his usual arrogance was gone. He stepped outside, faced the flashing cameras, and said only this. "She reminded me of something I forgot a long time ago, what it means to be human." The world was stunned. A man known for his wealth and pride had been humbled by a child's simple plea. The little girl never imagined that one small request would change her life forever. By the next morning, her face was everywhere, on TV screens, in newspapers, and across social media. People wanted to know her story, who she was, and what had led her to that cafe with just a single coin in her hand. Donations poured in from strangers around the world. Families sent clothes, toys, and food for her and her baby brother. A local charity even offered her mother a stable job, ensuring they would never struggle the same way again. As for the millionaire, he found himself in an unfamiliar position. Instead of being admired for his wealth, people praised him for his change of heart. Invitations to speak at events about generosity and humility began flooding in, something that would have been unthinkable just a week before. But the most powerful moment came when he visited the girl's modest home. Carrying more supplies and accompanied by cameras, he sat across from her family in their small living room. "This isn't charity," he said firmly, looking into the mother's eyes. "This is me making things right. No child should ever have to beg for milk." The girl's baby brother cooed in his mother's arms, and the little girl smiled shyly at the man who, just days earlier, had humiliated her. It was clear, their lives were no longer the same. The story didn't stop at the family's doorstep. Within weeks, what had begun as a single viral video grew into a movement. People all over the country were inspired by the girl's courage, and by the millionaire's surprising transformation. Non-profit groups launched campaigns called Milk for Every Child, with donations flooding in to provide food and essentials for struggling families. Schools began organizing milk drives, where children brought cartons to donate to local shelters. News anchors reported that grocery stores across several cities had pledged to give free milk to families in need every month. What started as one girl's soft plea had ignited a wave of generosity that no one could have predicted. Meanwhile, the millionaire was invited onto national television. Sitting under the bright studio lights, he admitted something few expected to hear. "I didn't help that little girl because I wanted recognition. In fact, I'm ashamed of how I treated her at first. But she taught me something I'll never forget: even the smallest voices can move the biggest mountains." The audience erupted in applause. And somewhere at home, the little girl watched from her couch, holding her baby brother close, smiling shyly as she realized the world had listened. Behind the cameras and headlines, the millionaire found himself facing an unexpected transformation. For years, he had lived a life driven by pride, competition, and status. He was used to people applauding his wealth, not his actions. But now, things felt different. At night, he replayed the moment in the cafe over and over again. The look in the little girl's eyes, not of anger, not of begging, but of quiet determination, haunted him. It reminded him of his own childhood, a past he had buried long ago. Few people knew that he, too, had once stood in a grocery store line as a child, clutching a single coin. He remembered the sting of humiliation when the cashier told his mother they couldn't afford even the simplest essentials. That memory had driven him to amass riches, but it had also hardened him. Until the girl's words brought it all flooding back. He started making quiet visits to shelters and orphanages, donating without cameras or headlines. He sat with children, listened to their stories, and for the first time in years, he felt something more powerful than money: purpose. One evening, as he left a shelter, a reporter stopped him and asked, "Why are you doing all this now?" The millionaire paused, glanced back at the children waving from the windows, and simply said, "Because one little girl reminded me who I really am." Months passed, and the millionaire's transformation only deepened. What began as a single act of generosity turned into a mission that reshaped his entire life. He quietly set up a foundation dedicated to feeding children and supporting struggling families. Unlike his past ventures, this one wasn't about profit or publicity. He insisted that his name not be the focus, only the cause. But the world noticed anyway. Headlines shifted from "Millionaire's Redemption" to "From Pride to Purpose, one man's mission to end child hunger." Invitations poured in for him to partner with global organizations. Then came the moment that stunned everyone. At a press conference held in the same cafe where the story began, he stood in front of a crowd of reporters and announced, "I'm giving away half my fortune. Every dollar will go toward making sure no child ever has to beg for milk, or for anything, again." Gasps filled the room. This was a man who once flaunted his wealth as a badge of superiority. Now, he was tearing down the very walls of pride he had built around himself. The little girl and her family were brought onto the stage. The crowd erupted in applause as she shyly took the microphone, her voice soft but steady. "Thank you, not just for helping me, but for helping kids everywhere." In that instant, it wasn't the millionaire who was the hero of the story, it was the girl who had sparked a movement. The millionaire's announcement shook not only the city but the entire country. News outlets replayed his words on loop: "Half my fortune will go to children in need." It wasn't just a promise, it was a challenge to others like him. Within weeks, other wealthy elites began to feel the pressure. Some ignored it, but others, perhaps out of guilt or inspiration, started making their own pledges. A tech mogul donated millions to school meal programs. A famous athlete funded free breakfast initiatives across multiple states. Even a few celebrities who were known more for excess than generosity suddenly began giving back. It was being called the milk movement. What had begun with a single coin in a little girl's hand now rippled across the highest levels of society. The little girl's family was overwhelmed. They received letters from families across the world who said her bravery had inspired them to ask for help when they needed it, and to never give up hope. One night, the millionaire sat in his office, looking out over the glowing skyline. His assistant walked in with a stack of letters from children who had been fed because of his foundation. He opened one and read it aloud. "Dear sir, thank you for the milk. I don't go to bed hungry anymore. When I grow up, I want to be like you, but kinder." The millionaire smiled faintly, tears welling in his eyes. "Kinder," he whispered. "That's all that matters." A year after that unforgettable day in the cafe, the world had changed in ways no one could have imagined. The milk movement had spread to dozens of countries, feeding millions of children. Schools, charities, and communities worked together like never before, all sparked by one girl's quiet request. On the anniversary, the cafe held a small gathering. The millionaire walked in, not with bodyguards or an entourage, but simply as a man humbled by life. The little girl was there too, now brighter, happier, her baby brother healthy in her mother's arms. The cafe owner had framed a photograph on the wall, the exact moment when the millionaire slid the mountain of milk bottles toward the girl. Beneath it, a plaque read, "One small voice can change the world." As the millionaire looked at it, the girl tugged on his sleeve. "Do you remember me?" she asked with a shy smile. He knelt down, meeting her eyes. "I could never forget you," he replied softly. "You reminded me what truly matters." The room filled with applause, not for wealth or fame, but for compassion, humility, and the power of a single act of courage. And as the little girl held her brother close, she whispered words that echoed far beyond that cafe. "I just wanted milk, and now the world is full." Months later, the story had become more than just headlines, it was history. Schools taught children about the milk movement, showing how a single moment of kindness could ripple across the globe. Documentaries were filmed, books were written, and charities worldwide credited their inspiration to the courage of one little girl. The millionaire, now older and far quieter than before, stepped back from the spotlight. He no longer cared about flashing cameras or applause. Instead, he spent his days visiting schools and shelters, always carrying one simple message. Never underestimate the power of asking, and never underestimate the power of listening. On the second anniversary of the cafe moment, the girl, now more confident and smiling brighter than ever, stood on a stage beside him. She spoke into the microphone, her voice steady and strong. "I didn't know my small voice could be heard by the whole world. But now I know, even the smallest voices can change everything." The crowd erupted in cheers, not for riches, but for hope. The millionaire wiped a tear from his eye, knowing his legacy would never be his wealth, it would be this movement, born from a child's plea for milk. And as the applause thundered, the girl looked up at him and said softly, words only he could hear. "Thank you, for listening." For the first time in his life, the millionaire bowed his head, not in shame, but in gratitude. The world had been stunned once, but now, it was forever changed.